Hello, everyone. This is going to be quite a technical session. We are going to talk about Studio UI and actually how you will be able to integrate your own version of Studio UI. I want to talk to you about, I have 8 points pointed out. First of all, we're going to check what is Studio UI. I think all of you actually already saw some demos of it today and yesterday. But why should you actually integrate it? We are going to talk a bit about authorization, some examples after that with a small recap, and the horizon, so what is actually coming for Studio UI. So first of all, Studio UI is actually the end user view. So it's the place where your end user will actually interact with the templates that the template designer has created. It uses a subset of the features that a template designer actually can use, and for now it's limited to changing variables, but we will add functionality later on. It is optimized for mobile. It's actually built mobile first, which is a new thing for Chile actually. So yeah, it will also look great. I have an example here. Whenever you're going to integrate it or use our own Chile GraFx to play around with it, mobile friendly. And it is tailored towards my project. So everyone saw it. My project is a private project that you can actually work on based upon a template. So why should you actually integrate it? And yeah, not create your own integration with the SDK, for example. First of all, because it is easy to set up. You will see in a couple of lines of code, you're actually up and running with a complete integration. And you will be able to grow as we grow because we will start adding new features to it and you will actually have them from day one. Whenever we are releasing something to Studio UI, you will also be able to have them. And next to that, we allowed you actually to adapt some features. So you will be able to actually adapt your own Studio UI to the needs of your integration. But first, to start off, we should actually talk about authorization because it's maybe quite a complex subject. And how we do authorization for an integration is actually by using M2M. So we will actually be able to create your own integration on our platform, and you will get a client ID and a client secret following the OAuth security flow. Those client ID and client secret are, yeah, like it is said in the name, it's very secret. So you should actually never share it with anyone because it will allow people to actually do things on your environment. So that means that your browser is actually not the right place to store your tokens or your client ID and client secret because a browser is not safe to store anything basically. There are some kinds of attacks that actually allow people to hijack your browser and yeah, then they have access to your entire environment and the things that you can do with your token. That's why we actually translate this client ID and client secret to a token that is only living for a certain amount of time. So with no further ado, let's jump into the code a bit. I don't know, are there a lot of developers here or is it, I don't know what the audience is, but yeah, I will do it anyway, so it doesn't matter. So yeah, to start off, to get that token, oh, you don't see it, okay. Now you see it. To start off, to get that token, you will need one API call. Ah, yeah, indeed, you're right. I'm actually going to do something else. I'm going to change my font size manually. Um, Font. And maybe, yeah, one control plus as well. That's a lot, but okay. Is it readable now? I guess so. Yeah. Okay. So what I did is actually I built a super small backend on Node.js. And yeah, to be clear, I'm not a backender, but if I can do it, I guess every developer can actually make this one. So I'm not a backend developer, but I created a small backend in Node.js using Express to allow endpoints to be there. And you will see that actually your client ID and client secret are used here, and we store them in some variables, but they are coming from an environment file, an env file it's called. That's actually kind of a secure way to store it locally without exposing your client ID and client secrets into your application itself. because if someone was able to read your code, they would, for example, also be able to then read your client ID and client secret. And again, it is not secure to share it with anyone. So to start off, I have a one endpoint on this backend, which is the token endpoint. And the only thing that it does is actually do a call to our integration login page, where we share this ID and secret, and we fetch the token from there. So it will return the token, and we store it into our session of the server. So that means that we don't need to always ask for the token. We just store it whenever we're doing a request. And that is it. So one endpoint, and that's all you need to actually be able to integrate Studio UI. On the front end, it's another story. You will need a basic HTML page. For your own sake, I would actually also add the scaling viewports and set the initial scale to 1. That's what you see here. Otherwise, when you're going to watch it on mobile, it will not look very good. And I think that's something that you want probably. And we load in also some CSS file that is coming from our CDN. So that will enable our application to look as good as it actually does. I set some basic styling, nothing too fancy. You will see that later on. So here in the body, you can actually do whatever you want. We don't care, but you need a div where you will actually set an ID to, called Studio UI container in this case, because we will actually inject our application into this div tag. We also fetch our JavaScript inside of a script tag, as you see here, coming from our CDN, so it's also cached. It's a bit reduced in size, which is probably better for your loading times as well. And some very basic custom logic. So we need to get, first of all, that token from our backend. So this is a basic JavaScript example of how you can fetch that token. I didn't add authentication on the front end. You probably want that, depending on your case. And we are going to fetch the token from our backend here, and we will pass it to a function inside our initialization call. So we first get our token, we expose it, and we then use it. Here we say whichever ID we used to actually inject the application. We set some variables, like, for example, the environment base URL, which is important to fetch your media, for example. Your project ID, because you are going to want to load in a project, and a project name, which actually can also be anything you want. You can take it from the backend, or you can make it something that you actually want yourself. And then something very cool is the refresh token action. So you already heard me saying that a token actually has a lifetime of, I think it's now 24 hours. We're going to reduce that in the future. But we are figuring some things out. But this refresh token action is actually a callback that you can pass to Studio UI. And whenever your token is invalid, that would actually mean that you can't do any calls anymore, because you have no context of what is going on. And your token is not able to authorize itself anymore with our APIs. So what is this callback going to do? It's actually going to say, hey, my token is expired, please generate a new one. And that new one will actually be automatically injected in the application. So that means basically, unless your integration got deleted or your secret got changed, that you will always be able to keep on using your integration, also after this 24 hours, for example. So then we actually just basically pass all our parameters that we set up above. And on the window object, you will see, because you injected our script that you fetched from the CDN, you will actually see Studio UI is available, and you can load in the Studio Loader config and pass all these parameters to it. So you see everything coming back: the out token, the refresh token action, the ID, and the name. And that's it. You just need to run this, and you will actually have a working example of Studio UI, as you can see it in the in your UI of GraFx itself. It's exactly the same. Let me show it to you. So maybe that's also good to mention. All of our things, like, for example, when you're creating an integration with the SDK, but also for Studio UI, we require you to actually run your files on a server, a local web server, or in the cloud, of course. That is because otherwise you will not be able to fetch securely any other things, or apart from what you will show in your HTML. So I have a cool extension in VS Code that actually allows me to just open up a live server very quickly without any setup. If you want to know it, I can share it later. And as you already see, I have added a bit of styling so that you know that it's not the Studio UI, but it's an integration of Studio UI. And if the internet allows me, it should actually load in the editor as well. For the record, I'm just going to check if it is true. I forgot something else, so I actually need to start my server. That's maybe a good idea. And I will also take this one and put it right next to the application. All right, so let me reload. And you see, there it is. This is your Studio UI integration fully without anything. So you saw in a couple of lines of code, we actually have a running integration working on your machine. Of course, this is local. This is not very optimized for production probably, but it just gives you an idea how easy it can be to start off with Studio UI. But that's actually not all. So you probably already saw that I had some other files open. And I also have a slide for it, but it's basically useless. Uh, so there's also an extended example, an advanced example, because we actually want to have you, be able to change some things you will see later on. And I said a good thing this is not a business track because it actually involves a bit more code. So here we have our advanced server. I'm not going to go over the code, that's not for now. But what I maybe want to highlight is I added actually a couple of endpoints. So the first one is one for getting the document. Second one is one for getting the project metadata. So for example, the project name, but also from which template it's inherited can always be handy. And also a function to save your project. So you will be able to, with this call, to actually save your project to our backend. So the HTML and JavaScript and styling is actually completely the same. The only difference is that we now in our JavaScript will have a lot more parameters that we can play with. And I will take another, 1 second. Yeah, here. So I also have a new loader taken. This one actually allows you to have a bit more freedom. There are other loaders with even more things to set up, but for the scope of this demo, I will keep it short and use this one. So the Studio Loader custom template config allows you to actually, apart from having the basic one, you will actually be able to override the functionalities, for example, for saving, for getting your document metadata and getting the document itself so that you can actually add API calls to it that you want to log something in your own backend, for example. But there could be a wide range of reasons why you would actually want to do that. But next to that, you can also set two other things. In this case, we have output settings. So you can actually say which output settings you want your integration to be able to output. So in this case, you see JPEG true and MP4, this is the second time that I make that mistake. So JPEG and MP4, JPEG to true, MP4 to false. This would actually mean that whenever we are going to load this one in, you will only see JPEG and not MP4. All the other ones are actually rendered as false as well if you don't include them in your object. But next to that, you are also able to set some UI options. UI options will be extended in the future as well. But for now, it's actually, there are two widgets in it. One is the download button that you can set to visible true or false, which will hide it if you don't want your users to actually do output. And also the back button can be hidden, but also the back button event can be changed. So whenever you want to click on the back button, in the basic behaviors that it goes back to the previous page, but maybe in your integration you want to go to a specific page, for example. So that is actually overridable. Then we have our basic functions to our own backend. So I just hooked them up to the environment API. So they are doing basically the same, but it's just to give you an idea how it actually will work for your integration whenever you want to extend the functionalities of the endpoints given here. All right, so maybe let's try it out, I would say. I need to close this server because this was actually the easy one, and I will load in the advanced one. And I will close this easy integration and open up this one again with a web server. And now you will actually see in the terminal on the right, which I also will make a bit bigger, the things that it is actually doing. So you saw the integration loading in, and you see now that he's actually using the endpoints on our end because I added some console logs in the backend to actually say what he's actually doing. So you see that the token gets requested at load. Whenever I'm going to change something, and I'm going to show it to you, where I will remove this on, for example, Brian the Hero, then you see that the project actually gets saved again a second time in this case. So yeah, that's just to show you how the autosave works as well. So whenever you're going to change something, there is an autosave mechanism, and it will actually fire the requests to save the project here as well. And that's to demonstrate that it's actually working that way. But now we have added the output settings, so you will be able to see that only JPEG is available. If I, for example, would change my integration so that the UI options are different, and I would say JPEG to false, for example, or let's set MP4 to false, this will actually work the other way around. So now everything is basically set to true, except for MP4. So you see, MP4 is not in the list. And that's a bit the logic behind it. Whenever you're going to mix them, like we already showed, it's only going to show you the ones that you actually didn't select. And if you're going to say JPEG is true, JPEG is true, only that one, then you will see that only JPEG is actually shown. And you can't do anything else, like the previous example. So that is how output settings work. Then for the UI options, you already saw, if I click the back button, you don't see anything happening, but I added a console log to it. So you see that actually the back button has been pressed 4 times. I was a bit nervous. And actually, that is it for now. So yeah, it's as easy as that. I can maybe, for example, to give a good example, set the download button to false, and you will actually see no download button anymore. The cool thing about the server is actually that they also hot reload. So whenever I change something, the HTML will also change, but you can see that, it's super easy to actually start setting it up. Okay, enough of the code. I probably bored everyone already, so let's move on. Let's do a small recap about what you actually saw. So first of all, we have our Studio UI basic integration, so the one that I showed without any parameters. This is the almost out-of-the-box experience because there is one thing you need, that is that backend call to actually fetch your token, because it is not safe to store client ID and client secret in your browser. There is basically zero maintenance because I didn't show it to you, but I was pulling in the latest version of the Studio UI. So that means whenever there is a newer version, it will actually take that version and load it in. So like I said, you will actually always have the latest features. You can also take a specific version because in the future we will allow template versioning where you will actually be able to select a certain version of your engine. And then it's of course necessary that Studio UI is also using the same version here. It is the most easy way to actually integrate the full GraFx experience, and only in 120 lines of code, backend and front-end added up together. So 120 lines for people who are not coding, maybe you think, well, 120, that's still a lot. Well, no, it isn't. It really isn't. Under 20 lines is definitely not that much. And yeah, to make it a bit more visual, I actually made a rating. So the time to set up, we scored it with 1 studio point. The overall complexity, also 1. backend work also one, because you only need one endpoint, and the front-end work maybe with two. If you're a bit new into JavaScript, yeah, then I think it could take you more than 1 hour, so that's why I gave it two. Then the extended integration. So this is actually more flexible way to integrate Studio UI. It is flexible, but it's with its limits. So we will allow you to do things, but we are not going to allow you to do everything out of the box. You are still able to actually hook into the SDK and play around with it. But yeah, then we can't guarantee that things will keep on working because you are probably changing the behavior. So like I said, you are able to hook into the system. And if you really want to secure front-end application where you, for example, only have access to the output settings and not the output settings, but the output and your assets and all the other things you want to do on the backend, this is maybe a more secure way to do it because the token that you need to expose to the front end can, for example, be trimmed down. And it is done in 220 lines of code, all included. So yeah, still not a lot, but it's a bit more, almost double. So here the time to set up is scored with 2 studio points, overall complexity also 2. Backend work is a bit more. I scored 3 because you saw that you actually need to create these endpoints. You can also leave them out because those are optional. So if you only want to, for example, hook on save, that is also possible. And then front-end work is also scored at 2 because it's basically the same. A bit more parameters, but that's it. Then, I don't know if someone of you was here last year, but there we did an integration live on stage with the Studio SDK, a very basic one, of course. This will actually offer you a limitless functionality. You will be able to do whatever we do in the workspace as well, or in the template designer workspace. But it's of course also is maintained and created by you. So you will have full control, but also full responsibility on that one. So it is definitely the more complex version of an integration. But Studio UI is built on top of this. So here the time to set up is actually scored with 4 points, overall complexity with 3. The backend work at 2, because I believe when you have more control in the front end, you will probably need less work in the backend to do certain things. And the front end work is then, of course, yeah, a lot more. So that's scored at 4. Just to give you an idea. I'm not going to put man hours in this or yeah, that's going to bring us too far. But that was it. So what is actually next? Because you saw something now, it is actually available to integrate, but I can imagine that you actually are anticipating on a bit more features. So what's on the horizon? First of all, there is going to be a way to set your output settings in a very manageable way on GraFx, so that you will be able to not only allow that users are able to download MP4 or GIF, but you will also be able to actually go a bit more in detail of what the output is actually going to look like. And Studio UI is also going to, of course, use that as well. Then there will be some integration project management. So like I already said, the projects that it's using is private to you. So the integration that you create is actually also an integration that has private projects. So that means that actually no one can use these projects except for your integration, which we know that makes things a bit more complex. So we're going to try to tackle that in some way, in one way or another, we will find a way. But that is something that is definitely coming. And next to that, we're also going to extend the out-of-the-box functionality so that you can actually, with the basic integration, even hook into more things from the front end and don't need the SDK for that. Then, yeah, to maybe to finish the presentation, we actually created or made the Studio UI open source since Monday. So Frederik here did it for me. Thank you. So it's completely open source. It's available on GitHub. Why did we make it open source? Well, because we think that it's actually a great example of for live documentation. So it is an integration built on top of the SDK. Whenever you want to either work with Studio UI or build your own full-blown integration, this is a great starting point. You will see actually how things are done. And yeah, like I already said, it is built on top of the Studio SDK, and the documentation to start integrating is actually also included in the repository in Markdown files, so it's easy for everyone to follow. So if you have a GitHub account, you can scan the QR code and actually give us a star or start following the repository, start following with Chili Publish, for example, because we are actually going to make a lot more things open source in the future as well. And that was it for today. If you would have any questions, I'm here until the end of the event. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.